As the last speaker, I'll try to wrap up. I don't think I'm going to be providing anything very useful or practical. What I'm going to try to do is give a little bit of forecasting as to where I think we've been, where I think we'll go in the near-term future, and where I think we'll go as we bring what has typically been offshored onto the onshore. And when we talk about onshoring and offshoring, we fundamentally go to economics and the concept of comparative advantage. And what that means is if you are able to do something better than me, something faster than me, or something less expensive than me, I should give that piece of work or that service function to you because you'll offer better value to my customers. So that led to whole industries migrating from developed worlds to underdeveloped countries. It started with the developed world. Offshoring itself was a whole part of this process. That's the term that people use to push something outside of their home country jurisdiction. Onshoring is just the opposite. So once something has been offshore, placed into the Cayman Islands, it is brought back onshore, which is what we're doing these last few years with the development of the OFC and the LPF. So we are bringing back to Hong Kong functions and services that in the last 20 or 30 years have been primarily undertaken in the Cayman Islands. Nearshoring is yet another concept whereby a country like my home country, United States, would have given jobs and services to places like Mexico or El Salvador, places like that that were nearby. Here in our local country context, it would refer to China, our country, which is with the offshoring jobs to near countries like Vietnam, Thailand, even India, things like that. But what is important here is the concept of comparative advantage. As costs rise, and we've seen this here in home country China, as costs have risen, and in Taiwan and Hong Kong as well, those jobs were located elsewhere. And as China has developed and become more prosperous, it is now in some parts of China more expensive. And so those jobs are being offshored as well. The background of this recently in the last 10 years with the development of the internet has been very, very swift. In manufacturing itself, we've gone from a trading model to let's invest. So I used to work for Apple. I'm an Apple alumni from more than 30 years ago. And all companies like that would produce product and then try to sell it overseas. And very quickly, this led to my old country developing a factory in Singapore and then exporting those computers made in Singapore to neighboring countries. As this then developed, Apple, through a whole host of supply chain companies, most notably Foxconn, then decided to invest heavily in these host countries and has created tens of thousands of jobs in the emerging markets, if not hundreds of thousands of jobs. This competition is fierce. It's global, it is unrelenting, it will get faster and more global in the future. And the onshoring, offshoring, nearshoring, inshoring interplay will continue to increase as people continuously look for some type of advantage, whether it is the speed of service delivery or the quality of service or better parts, better manufacturing. This will only increase in the future. Now, what does this have to do with asset managers? Well, actually quite a lot. Asset managers aren't going to produce any widgets to sell to anybody. We're going to produce a service. And the service that we are promising people is diversification of returns, better returns, things like that. And you can see by virtue of the services that we get through high-speed telephony, through all the fiber that's been drawn through the oceans of the world, plus the quality of the internet, and even now the development of the World Wide Web 2, version 2, this will only increase. It would have been a dream 30-odd, 40-odd years ago to have the degree of telecommunications quality. But even in my apartment, and I'm sure everyone sitting in this room today has fiber to their apartment at unbelievably high bandwidth for very low cost. And this has made it possible for us to conduct this video seminar today through very high quality transmission, and this will see a reworking of the workplace itself. Asset managers will be able to outsource or offshore. A number of service functions, you can see them listed out here in this slide provided by McKinsey Company as well. And asset managers will be able to draw on talent wherever they find it. That is very powerful and very appealing to asset managers. And one thing that asset management in general benefits from is cognitive diversity. That means people who think differently from you. The idea of bringing together people who work on a common platform but who are able to contribute different ways of thinking about things is very appealing to the asset management industry. We used to think of this as a win-win phenomenon, but it is not always the case. When Apple outsourced jobs, as did IBM, and put all of these jobs overseas, when clothing manufacturers moved factories outside of developed markets, they were able to provide much lower clothing or much lower products to their home country end users. On the investors' end, this meant that there was a fantastic market growth. It opened up markets, return on investment kept getting higher. On the recipient country end, China, for example, Vietnam now, it brought millions of people out of poverty, but often at the expense of developed countries. And of course, this has led recently to a phenomenon that we've seen in the United States. There have been a lot of disaffected Americans who have lost their jobs. This phenomenon of people being left behind is jumping around the world. It is hopscotching around the world. It is not a phenomenon unique to the United States. You will see it going around the world. And what the biggest threat is, in my opinion, isn't necessarily low cost of labor. It's the robots and artificial intelligence. This is really going to upset the table for a lot of industries because robots can be placed anywhere. Artificial intelligence now, by way of the cloud and mobile applications, it too doesn't really have a home to speak of. So this is going to create even more jobs. It is going to create even more integration. But it too will leave behind lots of people who will be very unhappy. And this will put pressure on governments to respond to this. So there is a gap. And we are trying to level out the gaps. There is a lot of conversation in the news these days about gaps, closing the gaps. And the third gap that we talk about, time, will also be closing due to something called blockchain. If you can have instantaneous settlement of securities in the marketplace, that will revolutionize the securities market, as will DeFi, decentralized finance. There are a lot of people investing in this. We are going to see phenomenal changes in the asset management world, but we are never really going to get to an ideal state. We will never reach parity. You can look at the gender gap alone, expected to take 135 years by one estimate. Now, 135 years is a long, long time. That means none of us today listening to me will ever see gender parity, let alone the other types of parity, let alone the people against whom we're measuring parity in the future. All of that will change. There is going to be a clustering of people in the cities. You see this in places like Japan, which has an aging population. Young people don't want to live out in the countryside. Those of you who loved visiting Japan can pick up small houses for free or for a very low amount of money. We have a similar phenomenon taking place in China as well. And the government in China, central party, is trying to do something about that. But we are always going to have the poor. I took this quotation from the New Testament. Something said 2,000 years ago, but it's true even though today. So people in the future will be clustered in cities. We'll be growing up and not out. Population growth in the next few decades, as far as we can see, will be outside the developed countries, who are largely losing people due to aging. And our population will grow to 9 billion people by 30 years from now. Things like food, clean water, these are going to become issues for all of us. And there will always be some place cheaper to invest. Now, maybe that will be Latin America selectively, maybe that will be countries in Africa selectively. So the future of manufacturing onshoring, a lot of people will be moving back. So countries like Germany, France, United Kingdom, Canada, United States, who push jobs overseas are pulling back the jobs for a variety of reasons. They are, and one of the things that will help them do that are robots. So robotic functions can manufacture things very cheaply. To service robots, though, you have to have very highly qualified people. So again, some jobs will be lost, other jobs will be gained and created. Services sector itself will be better positioned for some of the onshoring activity because there is no plant, there is no factory to relocate. We've now made it easy to re-domicile funds of any type from Cayman, BVI, Delaware, wherever. We can bring them onshore in Hong Kong. We do it very, very inexpensively. Fill out a couple of paper forms, get investor consent, and there you go. But there's no one to lay off, no factory to shut down, no negotiation with the country that you're departing, no factory to rebuild anywhere, and of course, less impact on things like sustainability. All of these things will make it much easier for the investment management, the wealth management industry, which is getting an awful lot of attention. These are all service sectors, industries that are being brought back onshore, and it's a good thing. All of this digital demand will be created among onshores. It will be driven by the fluidity with which these transactions take place, the power of it. If you look at the new products that are coming out on the market, speed that is increasing every day, the apps. I'm currently spending a lot of time learning a foreign language at night. I wish I'd had these apps 40 years ago when I first started studying these languages. You think, gosh, what's wrong with you? Studying the same language for 40 years. Well, it's a tough language, and maybe I'm not the best student. But in any event, the apps that are out there for free or very low value have made it so much easier. Now, why was it that the asset management industry was driven offshore, driven off their home countries to begin with? And the answer is primarily due to tax. So I want to take you through a little bit of history as to where this was and why we've had this phenomena happen. Since I come from the United States, that's my home country, and I've seen the development of the private fund, public fund industry in the United States. It is the leading funded center in the world. And I've seen this develop very successfully, bring a lot of capital to the United States, bring a lot of financial talent to the United States. And there was something that was due to tax. This was called the 10 Commandments. It has nothing whatsoever to do with the Old Testament. But these were the provisions that required a hedge fund manager, for example, that was managed in the United States. These 10 functions had to be shifted offshore, primarily the Cayman Islands, because it's only a 90-minute flight from Cayman to Miami, and then you've got all the New York lawyers, it's a few hours away. But just look at the things that are mentioned here: communicating with shareholders, the general public, selling shares of the company, getting new subscriptions in, auditing the accounts, dispersing payments, conducting shareholder meetings, making redemptions of company stock. And you have to ask yourself, why would you have to push any of this offshore? And it was due to a tax reason. Well, this was silly. And finally, it was recognized as being silly. And in 1997, the 10 Commandments were repealed. And as one commentator noted, quoted this from the site, didn't take a genius. Anybody familiar that knew something about securities could see just how silly this was. But we did it here in Hong Kong. When I first started working in Hong Kong, setting up hedge funds, we did have the offshore fund managers. We pushed a lot of these functions offshore, and because we didn't want to be taxed, and there was no unified tax exemption at the time, we had to carve out those things. Functions like the 10 Commandments, we had to carve them out and make arrangement for them in our investment management agreements and our sub-advisory agreements, and we played this shell game with the tax man. And so it too was finally repealed here in Hong Kong. We now have the unified fund exemption. I couldn't see what took so many countries so long to recognize how natural and how easy this was, and it is still going on in other countries. I won't name them. But eventually, they too will be forced to bring these onshore. They too will understand that this should not be a tax function. it was always the taxman who objected to this, because the thinking was, if there's a company operating in my jurisdiction, I'm going to tax it. And it was strange for people to think, well, here's a company, a business, an entire industry operating inside my jurisdiction, and you're asking me not to tax it? And so it was always the tax agencies around the world that were resistant to this, but finally they too crumbled under from pressure from the securities industry, or just the general perception or belief that they really weren't collecting very much tax revenue at all, because lawyers like me, along with assistants like auditors, like the gentleman sitting to my right, pushed all this offshore, and so we were able to essentially not get taxed as well. So we now have the base erosion profit shifting functions, the OECD studies, which came out from like 10 years ago. You could see, if you were paying attention, the handwriting was on the wall. This was all going to be brought on shore selectively in countries around the world. Here, of course, it has gravitated back to Hong Kong and to Singapore as well. So both Hong Kong and Singapore have benefited from this. These are new jobs that are coming back to us. They're high value jobs. The people who hold these jobs will be taxed appropriately. Taxman actually will collect more tax revenue as a result of this. So we are now getting off the off-ramp and getting back onto the onshore ramp. And what everybody wants, what the fund managers want, what the investors want, is having the business close by to them. So bring all of these functions back on shore, make it easy for the investors, make everybody feel a lot more comfortable, create high value jobs, and actually create more high value tax revenue for IODs of the world. So here is mention of our friendly competitor down the street, Singapore, what it has done since 2009. It created a very respectable limited partnership law. We followed 10 years later, approximately, with the LPF. As of Tuesday afternoon, just a few hours before the holiday started, there were exactly 337 LPFs registered, and there were exactly 58 OFCs. Who knows, maybe there was a few more created before noon today at this pace. It's very rapid. But the fact is, this has been a stunning success for Hong Kong and a stunning success for Singapore. Also, no need to go over this as well. We've had it in more detail from what the tax exemptions are, what they're available. Almost no investment restrictions on either the OFC or the LPF, and this is wonderful news. But it just goes to show how important the tax orders were to all of this stuff. Taxman, concessions from IRD, MAS as well, and even up in Japan, concessions from their tax agency as well, have brought a lot of this business back on shore. They're very, very important. So the unified tax exemption, again, I won't cover this in detail. It's already been provided. We now know a lot more about it. The other thing that came up in Anson's talk as well, the DTAs, as more of these functions are brought onshore back to Hong Kong and Singapore, it allows our respective governments to be that much more aggressive in seeking tax relief. And so the double tax treaty network in both Hong Kong and Singapore has been increasing. We are going to see a lot more of this in the future. And I believe that will be the case, because as we bring on these jobs back in Hong Kong, we'll be bringing an entire ecosystem and growing it. And there will be some tax restructuring in the future related to this, unrelated to this. But that in itself will create opportunities for creating more double tax agreements as well. Our future, this is my crystal ball, if you will. We are going to see massive government intervention in the private sector. You can think of this as a good thing or not. It will create a lot more opportunities as well. There is also a belief that unconfined capitalism may not be the best approach to economic management. Even in my home country, in the United States, there is now a concept called stakeholder capitalism, something that's been in Japan and in other countries for a while, a little bit more of a socialist bent. So most common law jurisdictions give primacy of support to shareholders and shareholder value. That may be changing with something called stakeholder capitalism, which looks at something in addition to the value of shareholders, such as employees and their rights and their obligations. So we are going to see changes in globalization. We are going to see changes in supply chains. Onshoring will increasingly become the norm, especially for critical functions like pharmaceuticals, defense for sure, healthcare, infrastructure, tech, and yep, asset management. And the reason I include asset management with that group is because I believe asset management will become more and more to be seen very critical to the development and security of any country, because it will help to increase wealth, prosperity, which means there will be a lot more products offered to retail investors. There will be a lot more investor protection. There will be higher taxes with this. There will be significant tax reform with this. There will be tax restructuring with this. All of this will be a shifting away from unconstrained capitalism. I don't know what this will mean for a typically open, free port city like Hong Kong or Singapore, but I suspect the winds are changing and that we will have a more fair society, and we will try to inflate away what are unsustainable debt burdens. Debt burdens around the world are rising. They will slow growth. They will make it even more difficult to create this more fair society where we are going to be able to inflate away economic disparities and hopefully provide better opportunities for all of us to raise our families, buy residences for ourselves, and save for our retirement. I will entertain questions if there are any.
Thank you, Scott, for the very interesting, informative, and a forward-looking talk.